So, the elephant in the room, at least for those of you who have never played it, what exactly is Warframe?
At its heart, Warframe is a loot shooter. You play short levels really fast to gather items that help you unlock new Warframes. These Warframes are varied around combat and elemental themes, allowing you to use entirely different powers, weapons, and ways of movement. Some are melee-centric, others utilize magnesis, electronics, or spores. One Bard class plays music to buff other players, music that can be written using an in-game sequencer. You can play single-player or co-op. There's a PvP component, an open-world area, clans, a story, customizable pets, frames, ships, and loads more.
The Warframe of today is strange and varied, a bizarre game built atop the foundations of a very different experience. So, to understand the game as it exists today, we must first go back to that early prototype, to a digital Extreams that had 9 months to make a free-to-play experience that might just save the company.
So our company was focused on finishing up publisher stuff, pitching new stuff, things that were getting canceled, stuff like that. It was kind of imploding, right? It's no fault of the people that worked on those things. I mean, the ebb and flow of the economy, a publisher has a bad quarter, who's the first to go? Well, the contractors, and that's us. So that 9 months was trying to build as many of the beginning Warframes as possible so that we could have, a minimum set, and then trying to invent an infrastructure for this kind of so-called back end, because we have MMO light features, account persistence. None of that stuff we had any understanding of. Building all the stuff you need for independence. Now you got to make your own website. Now you have to make your own, customer support portal. How do you accept payments from people when you sell them a founder's pack? How do you get certification to take credit cards from people? It was really a lot of back-end infrastructure and database stuff, while the artist, right, scrambled to make as much of that kind of procedural level stuff that we could do to support, keeping people interested.
Minimum viable product. It was the smallest thing we could put out that people could play, people get an idea what we're trying to do. And slowly we've bolted on parts and added things to it. And I think that's how we treat everything in the game. Don't worry about it, ship it. It's fine. It's good enough for 1.0, ship it.
My name is Rebecca Ford, and my current job title is Live Ops and Community Director.
Cool. Current job title. What was your first job title?
Community, no, I think it was just intern.
Okay.
So that actually is true. Intern would have been the first one. I started my internship in January of 2011.
Cool. Had you ever worked in the industry before?
I was still in third year of university, so I sort of just came and never left.
Did you finish university?
I did.
Okay.
I did. No one ever asked for proof, but I did. It's true. When I first started, we were finishing The Darkness 2, so that was just sort of at the tail end of development, and I didn't have a role in any of that really. I just kind of came to the studio and figured where I could help. So I was doing launch parties for the products and just general office things, stuck around, and then Warframe really started becoming a reality in early 2012, so just mentally, and then it really hit the ground in around July, and I knew at that point that this would have been an opportunity, and luckily the people that I worked with felt the same way, so they were like, yes, this will need community support, and I was like, yes, I will do this.
So pre-Warframe, was there a community team?
No.
Okay. And when did you figure out that, oh shit, we need a community team?
Probably when we realized we were going to do it all ourselves. Not only do we need a community, we probably need to support these people. So I started the support community, forums, all that stuff. I think we were I don't want to use the word desperate, but I'm kind of going to. We were so desperate for this to work that we wanted to be in the thick of it as this alpha phase was happening. So we wanted to see what the problems were, where the issues appeared to happen for the game, for the bugs, for all these things. And it really just had us glued to our communication outlets, which would have been the forums at the time exclusively, just watching.
Rebecca joined the team and helped in any way she could, even going so far as to voice the character of the Lotus, Warframe's space mom who guides the player throughout their time in the game. The closed alpha was launched and the team kept a watchful gaze on feedback. Through emails and forum posts, they zeroed in on what bugs they needed to fix, what powers felt imbalanced, all while adding in new meshes for the Warframes. Warframe needed satisfied players, because if this project was going to work, it needed to start supporting the small team that was developing it. They drew inspiration from the success that many niche games were having on Kickstarter, and decided to put out a founders package for the game. This package would include a bunch of the game's currency, platinum, along with exclusive equipment, forum badges, Warframe sigils, and keys to the upcoming beta. The team had never sold in-game items before, so they had no idea if anyone was going to buy them.
I can kind of like put my finger on the most optimistic I'd felt, which was when we started our founders program, which was sort of our own Kickstarter version of the game, which was basically you can become a founder of Warframe, and that means that you'll sort of have meant it was successful if it turns out to be that way. And I remember watching real time as the first Grandmaster founder purchase came through, and at that point that was someone spending $250 to support Warframe for what it was at the time. That was like the moment when I realized people care about this game,
Right.
as much as us.
And I remember running into the office in November and right into the middle of a programmer meeting. They're all talking about problems, and I just burst in the door. We made $1,500 yesterday, you know. And they looked at me. I mean, it's not enough to pay them, right? That's not enough to keep the lights on. But my God, the look of shock on their face that people would actually pay for Warframe, you know, they were astounded.
Yeah, it was crazy. And what really at that time was the most scary was doing free to play and doing it wrong, because we were doing it wrong early on. We were selling power, no customization to speak of really at the time. We didn't really have a lot at the time except a fun, free, downloadable game that you could shoot and be a ninja in.
Warframe is a game that many consider to be fair free to play, but that wasn't always the case. As the game moved into closed beta, it had a supercharged system that allowed players to double the capacity of their gear. But there was no in-game way of unlocking this system. It was only available if you used real-world cash to unlock it, meaning those who were willing to spend could effectively be double the power of those who weren't.
The reason I don't like the Warframe here leveling up is if I go into this, there's nothing else to do because I need this upgrade, Orokin Reactor, and without it I can't take this Warframe any further. But you've got to use, you know, real money to do that.
We come back to the studio, I think on January 10th, 2013, we took out the pay-to-win-ish things that we realized were horrible. This isn't, and we realized it because the community was like, whether they paid or not, they were hating this thing, and we were like, wow, this really is awful. So out it goes. 2013 starts off with the DNA now slightly, you know, radiated to be fair free to play.
With the open beta 3 months away, the team was desperately trying to get attention from the press. But back in 2013, free-to-play was a term that lots of traditional gaming sites were staying clear of. The team was having trouble getting the word out to new players, but their communication with the community was beginning to create a lot of goodwill around this new IP. The growing buzz would eventually catch the attention of PC-focused YouTubers, and it was through that Warframe got its first big break into the mainstream gaming zeitgeist.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Total Biscuit. I'm here to ask and answer one simple question. WTF is Warframe? Warframe is a free-to-play co-op third-person action game developed by Digital Extremes. They brought you games such as The Darkness 2, Dark Sector, and they were of course involved pretty heavily in Unreal Tournament and all manner of different things. They've had
in terms of the public gamer consciousness, there was a before that video and an after that video,
Right.
like no question in my mind. So, and for me, like that was very indicative of how important it is to reach this viewership and everything. I don't want to say that in like a needle finger, like let's get the viewers, 'cause that's not what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say is people love looking around and finding new sources of entertainment. So, you know, YouTube is one of those.
Certainly potential involved in Warframe, definitely. It's a very high fidelity, obviously kind of AAA quality, free-to-play game. But it, I think, has a long way to go before it can really define itself as absolutely top tier and really have the content that's going to keep people playing for longer than a couple of days.
With more players coming through the door than ever before, the open beta launched on March of 2013, with 8 playable frames and hundreds of bug fixes, quality of life updates and balance improvements. The team was preparing to launch the game on Sony's new console, the PlayStation 4, but that wasn't going to market until November of that year, and free-to-play on consoles was an unproven market. At this stage, Warframe was only available through the basic web portal that the team had set up, so they realized it was probably about time that they turned on a certain valve.
We're now at this point where we can tread water and keep trying to build it. But it was really tenuous. It felt go, no go, right? There's laws about if you need to lay people off, you have to give them a severance. And that comes out of this reserve, right? So there's a point where you are really going to screw people over if you go right to the limit. So it was extremely nerve-wracking.
And it kind of got its feet under itself to support itself, just as we were running out of money. And so it launched, and we saw it did well. And then it wasn't until we launched on Steam that we knew we were saved, because we knew leading up to the Steam launch it was making enough money to sustain a small team, but we were 250 people. And so it's like we're sweating. It's like, okay, so let's turn on Steam and see how many people we can support. And we turned it on, and it jumped.
I remember every day I'd get up and I would check our rudimentary stats to see, how much had we made for the previous day, with the hope that at some point it would be enough to maintain the team that we had on it, or at some point it would be enough to maintain the studio. And I don't remember how many days it was that it wasn't. It felt like a really long time, but I really remember the day that we did. Like, I remember waking up in the morning, I'm yelling in the living room. My wife came out and she's just like, what's going on? I'm like, look, Warframes actually can support the studio.
And I was like, oh, okay. Well, now the problem is not just survival. The problem is retention and keeping them coming back and growing the content. And we have one level in the game, like, let's fix that, that kind of thing. That was a big shift, at least in my mind, was when the big Steam audience came.
Warframe was making money, a lot of money, enough that for the first time in 2 decades, the spectre of work for hire was no longer giving the executive team nightmares. But Digital Extremes had wandered into the problem that Steve had been warned about a year earlier. How was this game going to retain people? Free-to-play is a fickle beast, and while PvP games tend to keep people longer, PvE lives and dies on the amount of content available. Well, it turned out that the studio's biggest financial crutch, their large staff, was now their unfair advantage. Not only did they have 250 more people to work on the game now, but these weren't new hires brought in to help the game grow. These were veterans, folks who had made good video games, colleagues, friends, neighbours, people fighting not only for their livelihoods, but for their lives in London, Ontario. Digital Extremes had caught lightning in a bottle, and there was no way the team was going to let Warframe fail. They listened to the community and started adding new stuff immediately.
That year saw clans get added to the game, new Warframes are coming out, there's more places to play, and then we have our sights set on launching on PS4.
We had very humble beginnings with this game. Like I said, it was going to be that kind of Space Ninjas raiding ships, and then we kind of started to see that players liked hanging out in the game. So we started expanding. We started making custom tile sets for each of the enemy factions. We started expanding the enemy faction types, putting tile sets on specific planets to kind of get a better sense of the solar system exploration that we kind of had lightly touched on.
I think certainly when we expanded our customization, that was a huge part of what made people like the game better, just at a visual level. When we redid the melee system and the parkour system, those overhauls were particularly well received.
The movement in Warframe was originally pretty similar to most other third-person action games, running, jumping, and sliding. But a movement exploit known in the community as Zoran coptering allowed players to catapult their frames great distances. It fundamentally changed the way the game was played, but instead of nerfing this exploit, the team saw that the community was trying to tell them something.
Bullet jumping was brought in a way to traverse levels quicker because players really loved what they called coptering, which was the movement was tied to the slide, of a weapon. So certain weapons were really good at this because they had a very quick transition time. So they would fling you across the level. And some of these guys got insanely good and could basically traverse some of the biggest tiles in the game in basically one swing. And I was like, well, it's kind of game breaking, but we love that they love the flow of that. So instead of just nerfing that and moving on and going, no, you can't do that, we kind of embraced it and brought it into the core gameplay, but in a more controllable way. And I think that's kind of been the philosophy, is like the community latches onto things for a certain reason. Instead of just smacking their hands saying, no, that's not my vision, it's like, how can we embrace that and how can we bring that into the game and not just remove it outright. For the core gameplay, I think it's been an evolution of things that the community has wanted, things that we've wanted, and the marrying of those two things.
Reading the reaction to the community has been critically important for the success of Warframe. Hotfixes would come sometimes 2-3 times a week, adding new content, fixing bugs, changing the user experience. This balancing act between adding new content and fixing issues the community has is a constant back and forth battle the team has struggled with, and they found that the revenue the game makes from in-game purchases can be matched to how popular the latest content drop is. The better the update, the more players play, the more money the game brings in.
The hardest part about Warframe's life, I think, is the fact that it's clear from that data that Warframe needs to update to stay alive. The longer we don't update, the less people come check out the game, the less people stay in the game. So you have those two competing schools, stay in the game and come play the game. And then you have us, who has this 5-year, now 30 gigabyte behemoth that needs to be updated to stay alive.
Right.
So how do you explain to someone that you've been talking to that, you know, we will fix your bug, but we also really need to add this new thing, or people won't come? And they're like, well, stop adding shit, you should fix it. And you're like, we have to do both.
I literally met an acquaintance I hadn't seen in a while, and he said, I tried playing your game. And I opened that screen with all the cards and I thought, I'm not smart enough to play this game, and I didn't play it anymore. Rafe Koster is one of my favorite game designers, and his book Theory of Fun is just like my go-to. He wrote about how many times they changed the new player experience for Star Wars Galaxy.
Right.
And every time it did not affect their washout rate.
Really?
Yep. Here we did. We redid it again. Nope, retention's not any better. We still have this many % of people load it up, play it for a bit, and never come back. And we've done the same, you know. We work on this and we try to fix those things. We get stats and numbers and we get data scientists. So.
Why do you think that is?
People are smart. They look at it, they see that complexity, they know, they smell that means this game is going to take a lot of mental energy. And you're going to have to read Wikipedia if you want to min-max it. And they know, I'm either in for that or I'm out for that. Does this Netflix series have 24 episodes or 10, right? It's a big commitment to play Warframe. One of the big parts of my job, which is how much time are we going to burn on a new player, and how much time are we going to give to that 1,000-hour player?
One way they've managed to keep that open communication with the player base was using the power of YouTube and Twitch. Rebecca started a popular developer Q&A stream from the office's canteen.
And we are ready to live stream our first dev Q&A for the Warframe community.
Okay.
Hello everyone, welcome to DevStream 107.
Yay.
This is also our 5th anniversary of DevStreams. We have been streaming since the end of February 2013. It is now 2018. So if you've...
That's not true.
Yeah, it is. If you've tuned into all 107, then way to go. You've made it to more than all of us, I think.
They started an annual fan festival called TennoCon, where players of the game travel to London, Ontario to attend panels, hang out, and meet their fellow Tenno. They even created a way for fans to sell their own frames and weapon skins. This program, called TennoGen, has earned some members of the community enough money that they've been able to get off unemployment benefits. They have a partner program where they support 200 content creators who stream and upload videos about Warframe. They have a weekly community show called Primetime, and 2 of Rebecca's community team members, Megan and Danielle, run console-specific streams every week. They use the Twitch Drops program, which enables players of the game to get free in-game goodies when they watch Warframe streams. Over the course of Warframe's life, this community has grown organically. Some play all year, some are newbies, others are returning veterans. But the cycle of players is always tied to new content. So to try and keep things fresh, every once in a while, the team throws a curveball.
What was happening was we were doing our routine, and Warframe's routine is great and it lasts, and it has sometimes, I think it has a saturation point of people needing a pivot for Warframe. So the 2 years prior, the pivot was cinematic quests, right? It came out of nowhere. No one was sitting there saying, I want a story that's going to surprise me. But they were saying, I'm bored. So how do you treat boredom with ambition, right? So you kind of have this repeated scenario where you can see your players are bored. They're asking for stuff, but what they're really saying is they're bored, right? And yes, you can deliver this feedback loop of, okay, we'll buff this Warframe, we'll change that, we'll change these missions, and that matters a shit ton. That matters so much. But to treat the boredom at a different level, you need to shock and awe.
Right. Interesting. It's almost like the things you need to do are A, listen to your community, and B, not listen to your community.
Well,
you've done something.
I'm saying, like, basically, take your vitamins every day, right? Like, you will be healthy, you will be happy. It's good for you. It's good for us. But you know, sometimes you need a new flavor, right? So you're still trying to keep the maintenance up of this back and forth relationship, but you need to change things sometimes, because if we had just released a weapon week after week after week after week for the last 5 years, we wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation.
Right.
What we did do was we continued to release those weapons, but we added cinematic quests, we added Arcwing, we added Lunaro, which turned out no one really plays, which is fine. You're allowed to make mistakes, that's cool, but you need to try.
One of the areas where the team needed to try a lot was the game's economy. The challenge of creating real-world payment shortcuts for the loot grind fell on the shoulders of Sheldon Carter, and it's a responsibility he doesn't take lightly.
The guiding tenet is try not to push them so that they're gonna, grind their face off to get something, but also give them enough variance so that getting those resources is interesting. Despite best intentions, there's always something where we need our community to tell us, hey, this is too hard. We had things with Kavats, one of the pets that came out. It was, too many scans. You had to scan wild Kavats in order to have enough scans in order to incubate a new baby Kavat. And it was just feedback from the community. They're like, hey, this is taking me, is this what you wanted? Did you want us to spend 2 weeks on this? No, that's not what we wanted. We wanted you to do it. We want you to have to use the systems we have, but we don't want you to, spend forever. When we first designed Kubros, or myself, when I first came up with the Kubro idea, we wanted people to be able to change the fur pattern and colors. So we had a lever, basically, for all intents and purposes. It was a button you could push and it'd be like, oh, if you want to pay, I can't remember what it was, so much platinum, you can change the color. And then you could take an imprint of that and you could trade it to someone else. So it wasn't, we're trying to give you a way to you could get something cool and then you could give it to your friends. And we saw, a guy pulled the lever 200 times. And it's just oh my dear God, what have we done? We've made, we've created a slot machine.
Right.
And so, it was a couple days. I think it took us to take it out, a day and a half. That one is a big regret. Obviously that was insanely profitable for someone to be doing that, but that's not what our design intent, and that's not what the intent of the game is. So that's why it was, that's why we changed it. When you're dealing with something that does have a kind of a cash component, you have to really be careful. Of course that would be cool in a game where there was none of that, where you were just, putting in earned money into it. But as soon as you put it as a premium currency and people can just go, oh, what can I get? Oh, I got the gold one. Amazing. How much can I sell that to other people for? And you're like, oh God, can't do that.
I've spent the past few months playing this game, watching YouTube videos, tuning into streams, all to try and get a sense of what exactly it is about Warframe that hooks people.
There's the moment-to-moment, the movement, the aiming, shooting, the inner loop. Then there's the outer loop of abilities, and then there's progression outside of that. But I don't think these mechanics alone account for why players find themselves attached to Warframe. I think a lot of it has to do with the bizarre universe that the game is set in. When the team originally designed this game, Mike Brennan, the lead artist at that time, didn't pull his sci-fi inspiration from Hollywood. Instead, he looked towards Europe and the work of acclaimed French cartoonist Moebius. Then there's the story of this game, a mix of unfinished ideas Steve had that has evolved over the years. Then there's the movement of the game, which came from a weird bug. The lore of the game, the design of the biomes and tile sets, all of this came from ideas the team had later, built atop the humble foundations of that early prototype. What this all has led to is that the game looks and plays like no other video game. Warframe is a weird looking game. It's as beautiful as it is bizarre, and I think that's the surprise element that hooks Warframe players.
We do deliberately put a twist on everything we put into the game, whether it's even just as simple as the terminology. We have scarves in the games, but we don't want to call them scarves, we call them sandanas. You know, and it's kind of the same thing with the way we approach the sci-fi angle. You know, we have our Corpus, who are kind of the heavy tech enemy faction, but you know, Steve did this really cool thing where he said, well, they're kind of they treat greed as a religion, you know, and that kind of is a really great inspiration for how you kind of visualize that faction, and you can kind of bring in, you can kind of get a bit wacky, as we like to say, with kind of the design of this. We don't really have a lot of restraint for how far we push things in Warframe. It's really fun, actually, as a result.
And even down to like vocabulary that's used. Like,
Yes.
you don't just use the word like cat for your like cat-looking.
No, it
cat.
could not be a cat.
Right.
It's a kavad, of course. That's one thing that we've tried. Like, there is no internal gospel of Warframe, but if there was, one version of it would have the entry of give everything a Warframe name.
Right.
And you can kind of see how that happened over time. Like early on, we had, one of our amazing programmers naming our weapons. Like the sniper was just called the Snipetron, and it still is. Like that's still in game. But now you see like names that are appropriate for each faction, and like the Corpus names are Plasmor and like really sort of techie sounding, and then the Grineer ones are like the Stubba and the Stug and like just like more visceral sounding. And that was an evolved language dialect over time. I think it's a weird organic sci-fi world that is distinct to Warframe. Like that's it, and that art style definitely was the original draw for people to check it out, and it has been the reason that a lot of people stick around. And the uniqueness of each character and the level of customization of those characters, like these things are weird, and they are good weird.
The thing that I really like about how it's evolved is it's a very strong aesthetic.
Yeah.
And it's a very divisive aesthetic. You get people who love it, and I've seen comments where people, they try to play the game, but they can't get past the art. And in a way I kind of prefer that. I like that we make a strong statement versus just being something that's kind of a bit more vanilla.
I'm starting to figure out that perhaps what looked like maybe a barrier to entry is also maybe your like unfair advantage, is that you have this very idiosyncratic or very like unique world that once people are sort of in on, then they feel really they belong to it.
I think you're entirely correct. That is absolutely, because when we first started making Warframe, my background, as I mentioned, is more on the art side, and my directive to the guys was make whatever you want. Like, let's just make sure we do the free-to-play right. You make what you're excited about. And so our art director is monumentally talented. He just wanted to make what he loved, and I'm seen as like, oh, like it's a little different. And then, but I'm like, yeah, do whatever you want, do whatever makes you happy, like do what you are passionate about, which is a clear advantage, I think, for Warframe itself, is the passion of the team. Yeah, but I think you're right, in the end it's different, and it's different enough that it appeals to a certain crowd, and they get in there, and that's the world, and it's a unique world.
Warframe's world continues to evolve. There are communities of players within the game who write wiki articles on how best to min-max your frames. There are communities of pet fanatics. There are speedrunners, lore enthusiasts, and of course there are communities of people who just want to look good. The joke in the community is that since Warframe doesn't really have an end game, the end game is simply making the sickest looking frame you can. Something the community calls fashion framing. Last year, Warframe received its biggest update yet, the Plains of Eidolon, an open map for players to traverse, complete with quests to complete and mobs to kill. It's a wonderful step in an exciting new direction for Warframe, but perhaps it's not a new direction. Perhaps it's a step back 18 years to an idea for an MMO called Dark Sector that never came to pass.
I think you could easily make a case for we're on Warframe 3. You know, like if this was a traditional cycle, I'd say what was there in 1, the things that are there are you are the Space Ninja, but God, I mean, there's Tenno now. You can play out in open landscapes. It was a corridor shooter. You can fly around, you know, you were grounded. The amount of weapons, I mean, the game has just constantly evolved, and it still evolves now.
It's a lot of fly by the seat of our pants. It's a lot of like building the tracks as we're racing down, barreling, you know, towards it. You know, we have a destination in mind. When we're going to get there, we're not exactly sure, but there's definitely long-term goals, but a lot of the short-term stuff is kind of, you know, made up as we go.
It's not always an easy 5 years, and it's the best 5 years of my life, no matter what. Like, I'm not saying this is grim or anything, but to have a community that feels listened to is probably, I feel like it's a part of my life that I'm very proud of, but I also understand that not everyone always feels listened to in every industry, in every game, and it's really, you know, it's really something special that I hope we can continue to do well.
Warframe is what it was, and now it's grown in a really, really interesting way that was super compelling to the fans. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot more of that kind of stuff coming. So it'll be really interesting to see how the game evolves and what it becomes, because it's with so many people working on it and with such an expandable concept for a game or expandable premise. Who knows where it could go, but it'll become bigger and really, really interesting.
The thing I'm most proud of with Warframe is the change and is the castle built on those ruins. Like, we added fishing to the damn game, right? So we can get back almost to those completely infeasible dreams we had with the MMO Warframe, or well, it was called Dark Sector back then, but we can get back to those ideas and try kind of more weird things.
Plains of Eidolon, the site of an historic battle between the Orokin and a great sentient. These plains are a vast graveyard of the sentients who attacked the tower long ago. If local legends are true, you do not want to be out here at night.